Hello and welcome back to Crunchy Couture Club, a space for fashion DIYs, sustainable fashion talks, and a whole bunch of knitting and sewing discourse. In 2024, we saw the fashion pendulum swing away from maximalist styles to 90s inspired minimalist silhouettes that took us back to the basics for women's wear. Think basic shapes, classic styles, and muted colors. This surge in interest toward more minimal styles felt like a win for the sustainable fashion community because it meant that there would be more interest in collecting pieces that not only could stand the test of time in terms of what's in style, but also in longevity as people were gravitating more toward the want for higher quality items that could act as staple pieces. For most clothing brands, this adoption of minimalist silhouettes and classic styles was in direct reaction to what was trending at the time and will surely change again and again to adapt to whatever new aesthetic is the hot new thing for women's wear. But for some sustainable fashion brands such as Everlane, this aesthetic is their signature look and is in direct relation to their company ethos. A good friend of mine considers herself an extremely ethical and conscious shopper and an overall environmentalist. And while she rarely shops new, it's a priority for her to shop from sustainable brands. We were discussing Everlane one day as it's typically my first choice when shopping any sort of ready to wear clothing, and she made a comment that really stuck with me that while she generally enjoys Everlane's clothing quality, price points, and company ethos, she's often deterred from shopping their clothing due to their boxy and oversimplistic shape, as that look just doesn't align with her personal style. As someone who's been making a lot of their own clothing for the past 5 years, the reason for Everlane's design choice was super obvious to me. Boxier silhouettes make for less fabric waste. But for my friend who is a well-intentioned consumer but not exactly super knowledgeable about clothing manufacturing, these clothes can definitely come off as boring, unimaginative, or maybe even lazy in their design. So in today's video, I wanted to talk a bit about clothing manufacturing, discuss Everlane as the current leading sustainable fashion brand, and how even the design of your clothing can aid in its sustainability. In fashion design, a pattern is basically the template for which each part of the garment can be traced onto a fabric before it's cut out and assembled. So there's the designer that's designing the clothing in the traditional sense that you may be picturing with dramatic drawings and watercolors and so forth. But then there's a pattern maker who is taking this idea, this design, and figuring out how to make it into a physical clothing object. So let's say that a designer has drafted a design for a t-shirt. A t-shirt is obviously a 3D object that is intended for the human body. However, in order to create this 3D garment, it needs to first be totally deconstructed and flattened to each of its individual parts. This is because in their origin, all clothing is cut flat and in individual pieces. So in order to know what to cut out to create our example t-shirt, a flat blueprint-esque pattern is going to be made up of a front, back, sleeve, and collar that are the individual elements that create the end product of a wearable t-shirt, much like a 3D puzzle. But not everything that we wear in our day-to-day is quite that simple as a t-shirt, and some garments require many more pattern pieces in order to make them a reality. Take a button-up shirt, for example. You've got the front, the back, the sleeve, front pocket, collar, collar stand, sleeve cuff, placket, and button stand. That's already a lot more moving pieces than just our simple t-shirt, and that's just for your standard run-of-the-mill button down. The more pattern pieces a garment has, the more a clothing manufacturer has to cut out and then assemble to produce each piece. So for anyone in any brand that isn't making all of their products totally in-house, which is likely everywhere that you've ever shopped, to get from that point of design to a real life garment, the pattern maker creates what's called a tech pack, which serves as the blueprint for the garment. So it has the technical specifications, design details, and any other information that is needed by the manufacturers to construct the garment to the designer's specifications. There's of course a lot of other steps to the process before and after creating a garment's tech pack, but for simplicity's sake, What the manufacturer is going to do after receiving a tech pack is begin constructing the garments, starting with cutting the garment pieces from fabric. Fabric cutting is actually something that will heavily influence the overall cost of the final piece right from the beginning. And that's going to be up to whether the clothing workshop has the equipment to cut through several layers of fabric at once, or if the fabric is cut manually with just a pair of shears, as these two options vary wildly in their level of labor and time. So in this video, we can see an example of fabric cutting in its most sophisticated form with the use of technology. This level of technology is something that is pretty prevalent among high volume, large clothing manufacturers, and the cost barrier of these often keeps smaller manufacturers from adopting the technology. As you can see, they're preparing to cut through many layers of this yellow fabric and using a digitized pattern to guide cutting. If you've ever used a Cricut machine to DIY greeting cards or like stickers for your water bottle, this is definitely what comes to mind when I see this machine cutting this fabric. It looks to be highly precise, relatively fast, and essentially entirely automatic. And in this shot here, you see the cutting guides that the machine's using to create the clothing pieces. It appears to be a very simple top with sleeves, and the way they've laid these out leave very little room for any fabric waste, which is definitely the ideal scenario to both save money but also reduce waste. After about 12 minutes, the machine is finished with its cutting, and the layers of cut pattern pieces are ready to be peeled away from the offcuts and can now move forward to garment production. What's important to note is that all of these offcuts, which is all of the fabric that was left behind when the pattern pieces were taken away, is more likely than not automatic waste in the production process. That's because they're typically very small, unusable pieces that aren't deemed as salvageable, so they're just thrown out. Looking at this video in particular, this doesn't seem like it's the biggest deal ever, but the reality is that these offcuts are created a million times over every single day, and the waste really builds up over time, especially when you consider that a lot of fabrics that are in production are not made of biodegradable materials. Even before I began my own journey of making clothes, I was curious about finding sustainable alternatives to typical shopping choices. What I found most accessible was, of course, thrifting and consignment shopping, but I do have this distinct memory of taking a deep dive into the internet in the semi-early days of online shopping in search for sustainable, ready-to-wear clothing brands. I remember finding Everlane and thinking, oh, finally, they look legit. They look sophisticated, they have a great website, and pretty great pricing. It was also distinct experiencing their extremely limited style options, which was such a stark contrast to the Forever 21 website with pages and pages of available clothes. And I also remember that feeling so odd to me and kind of eerie in a way, which is an interesting reaction. I believe it was at least a couple years from that point that I actually bought something from the Everlane website, but they were always a brand I followed closely and would regularly visit their website just to window shop. Then when I got into making clothes in 2019, it was like a light bulb went off to how laborious making clothes actually is. Even though before this point I was sustainable curious, I have to admit that I was among the masses that truly believed that clothing production had been widely automated at this point. After I started making things for myself and spending 3+ days on a pair of pants that looked barely passable for pants, it gave me major pause when thinking back to how I had been taking my clothes for granted all these years. This sewing journey has definitely solidified my passion for sustainability in fashion, but it also deepened my curiosity and appreciation for brands like Everlane who are choosing to not take the easy way out when it comes to clothing production. Everlane is one of the leading, if not the leading, sustainable fashion company. Right on their About page, they state that, quote, "We want the right choice to be as easy as putting on a great t-shirt." This quote for me very effectively defines what Everlane is doing right when it comes to the sustainable fashion space. I mentioned this podcast in a previous video, but the Green Behavior podcast is a really great podcast that discusses the psychology behind consumer behavior, and it explores how the sustainability community can help employ that psychology to drive consumers towards sustainable products, but also drive them away from hyper-consumerist behavior. And what Everlane balances really well is the understanding that yes, their typical customer is well-meaning and does have some environmental motivations while shopping, but also knowing that shoving their sustainability ethos down everyone's throat every other minute is not going to be a sexy sales strategy. So I really admire how they balance those two truths and successfully serve both the well meaning consumer and the sustainable, passionate consumer. Everlane was founded in 2010 in San Francisco, and while they offer a full range of clothing and accessories, I remember in the earlier days they were really known for their denim game. And while they still definitely feature denim prominently in their lines, they've definitely grown beyond that early day focus. Everlane features several styles of tops, bottoms, shoes, outerwears, and accessories for both men and women. Their designs tend to be more simplistic, classic, and unassuming, but what makes them stand out from other similar brands is their commitment to ethical production and earth friendly fabric composition. For the past few years, since 2021, they have released an impact report that outlines their progress toward their sustainability goals for the year, their environmental initiatives, factory environmental management details, and what they're doing to aid in their supplier social responsibility, and updates on their internal workforce status and goals. Their 2024 report is not yet released, but their 2023 report outlined a lot of great wins, plans, and initiatives that were made by the brand throughout the year. For one, they collected a couple of notable recognitions in 2023, including winning Sustainable Brand of the Year at the Glossy Fashion Awards and earning a number one score on Remake's Fashion Accountability Report 2024. The report also details a number of sustainability efforts the brand made throughout the year, and while a lot of this could be lip service, they did manage to expand their already impressive list of textile certifications. Certifications in the textile industry serve as a mark of assurance for both manufacturers and consumers. They validate that products meet specific quality and safety criteria and that production processes adhere to strict standards. This is definitely an admirable venture on behalf of Everlane that helps them achieve greater levels of supply chain traceability. But it's important to note that just because they are able to collect all of these certifications, this doesn't make them more sustainable than, say, a small mom and pop clothing label that doesn't necessarily have the capital to chase those certifications. The report also goes into detail on their efforts to minimize waste and energy in their denim production. The denim industry as a whole is known for its extreme water usage, energy consumption, and chemical pollution, and it's one of the most environmentally damaging sectors in the fashion industry. And as I mentioned earlier, denim is really kind of Everlane's bread and butter. It's what they're known for doing really well. And so, in response to this, they speak to monitoring their environmental impact using a tool called the Environmental Impact Measurement Tool, which measures and manages the environmental impact of denim production from water use to energy use, chemical use, waste generation, and worker well being. Results from this tool indicate that most of their garment dyed and washed products achieved a low to medium environmental impact, but they say that they're looking to better their score in the future with the goal of achieving low or medium impact ratings for 100% of their wash recipes by 2025. Beyond this, the report gives a great deal of other information about various conservation efforts that are either in effect or planned for the future by the brand, including water conservation efforts, product circularity, reduced carbon emissions, regenerative farming, and more. And finally, they also outline their efforts towards enhancing worker livelihood, achieving gender equality, promoting fair living wages across their value chain, and supporting community impacts at the intersection of social and environmental needs. For the most part, this looks like working with vendors that also align with their standards for social responsibility, pursuing living wages for all workers, and combating modern slavery. This worker livelihood aspect of the report is especially important to note due to the brand getting themselves in some hot water in 2020 after being exposed for multiple counts of anti-Black behavior and union busting that were confirmed by an internal investigation that was catalyzed by an expose document that was the collective effort of 14 Everlane employees that referred to themselves as the Ex-Wives Club. Through this internal investigation, findings included counts of insensitive terms being used while discussing Black models, leaders violating employees' personal space by touching them and using inappropriate terms when referring to people of color. It also found that new hires felt isolated and unwelcome, that there was a lack of consistent policies around promotions, and that there was no formal processes to effectively escalate harassment, or discrimination. All of these wrongdoings have since been apologized for and put to rest by Everlane's founder, Michael Priesman, but I have no doubt that the company feels, and would be very smart to feel, the continued pressure to act on their promises to work toward greater diversity in not just their models, but in their workforce. All in all, the 2023 Impact Report is very impressive, and it definitely positions Everlane as a leader in the sustainable fashion space. And with their first Impact Report being published in 2021, they appear to be consistently delivering on their sustainability promises and have even improved their brand rating on Good On You, which is a brand rating system that was created to help consumers make more sustainable choices from a rating of good enough to good since 2020. So at this point, we know that Everlane pursues sustainability through things like water conservation, fair wages, and recyclable packaging, but how do their designs also work to tie all of this together? Scrolling through Everlane's website, you can browse through a modest yet comfortable amount of style options for both men and women across categories like tops, bottoms, dresses, outerwear, accessories, and shoes. Their designs have a distinct look. They're classic yet feel trendy, and overall pretty minimal in design. Everlane releases roughly 6 new styles a month, so that's around 72 new styles a year. And just as a fun pop quiz, can you guess how many styles fast fashion mega giant Shein produces in a year? I'll wait. According to Hannah Schmidt Reese, published in Perspex, Shein produces 314,877 new styles per year. Another report by Rest of World estimated Shein produces 1 to 2,000 new styles every day. Point being, if you visit your favorite brand's website and find that there's new pages of inventory on the daily, this is a problem. As I mentioned in the intro of the video, one of the major pain points for my friend as an Everlane customer is that their silhouettes as a whole are too boxy for her taste. And why is that? Of all of the design freedom in the world, why does Everlane consistently release these boxy, oversimplistic looks? Let's think back to our fabric cutting video. Remember all of those offcuts that were going to be sent to the landfills? Even for the most super straightforward t-shirt design, there will still be that significant amount of fabric waste. And this is where smart design reigns as the ultimate conservation effort. From the very beginning, Everlane's clothing is designed to produce minimal fabric waste. They're designed with minimal fussy features that can lead to the garment being difficult to repair, and they're designed to highlight the materials that they're made from, which is often high quality and ethically sourced. Overall, this design style is not entirely exclusive to Everlane. It's pretty popular among other sustainable fashion brands. And again, even though this design to sustainability pipeline really jumped out to me as someone who is a clothes maker, it really made me think about what other conservation and sustainability efforts that brands might be making that kind of go under the radar for the consumer or are completely invisible. It's not always a guarantee, or certainly not an expectation, that your favorite brands are going to release pages and pages of sustainability reports that outline their conservation efforts. So if a sustainable brand doesn't provide all of this to their customer, can they still claim to be sustainable? What makes a brand sustainable in the first place? A sustainable clothing brand consists of items that are being produced in the most ethical manner, from their product and packaging materials and water and energy consumption to their supply chain and labor alike. A sustainable brand aims to reduce their overall negative environmental impact from concept to product. So, understanding what we know now about how sustainable clothing starts with the design itself, how do you feel about making this quote unquote sacrifice in design when shopping new? Would you dress boxier or more plainly, potentially sacrificing your self expression if you knew that it was a more sustainable option? Or does style take the front seat? I'd love to know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.